Welcome to the Agents Angle, exploring the football agents world where it seems in recent times we have gone from fantasy to dark comedy and at times farce. I'm Jonathan Booker.
And I'm Peter Paleologos. In this episode of the Agents Angle, we draw on the knowledge of someone who has experience of being a football agent regulator, as well as an advisor to football agents, clubs, and other stakeholders on how to best navigate the complexities of the agent industry.
We will also look at the apparent abolishment of a hurdle to some football agents, as well as an appraisal of new resources to assist agents. All that to come on this episode of the Agents Angle.
Welcome once again to the Agents Angle, an episode which, like so many others in recent times, has been changing direction from what we originally had planned. This is actually episode 13. Unlucky for some would say. Yes, but our original plan was to do something of a post-mortem show, as this is the first recording after the scheduled implementation of the new FFAR, being the FIFA Football Agent Regulations, on the 1st of October 2023. But on reflection, we decided to try and give everyone, including ourselves, some respite from the FFAR and focus more on looking forward rather than the state of flux and uncertainty that a large swathe of the football industry, including agents, are trying to get their heads around. But despite our best efforts, this episode is not FFAR free, I'm afraid.
The current state of the football agent world means it's almost impossible to get away from FFAR. And if we did so, I personally think we'd be doing more of a disservice to anyone listening for news on the football agents world, as things are changing so quickly in regards to football agent regulations, and that, of course, relates largely to the effects of FFAR.
Very much so.
And although not totally an FFAR development, the following is related to and triggered by the FFAR situation as a whole. I wanted to firstly look at something that is important for so many agents involved in the agency world in England, and that's not just English agents themselves. This came to light last week, and at the time of recording last week's episode, we were unable to verify it in time for that show. Now, some weeks ago, we were going to look at the proposed NFAR, the National Football Agent Regulations for agents in England, that were released by the FA, the English Football Association, to some for a consultation period last month. But we were able to get our hands on a copy of these proposals and scrutinise them. But with the NFAR and the FA being challenged at this time with a Rule K arbitration process, and thus last week the announcement that the FA are maintaining the old RWWI, the regulations on working with intermediaries, we have put back reviewing the proposals for the time being, as they may never even be enacted, or when they do come back, they will be vastly revised. However, one thing I noticed, and I think we both noticed in the NFAR proposals for England back then, was in regards to the FA's clearinghouse, which, for those who are unaware, the clearinghouse has for many years processed payments to agents from clubs in England, either directly from clubs or from clubs on behalf of players. Now, the element that drew my attention was Regulation 7.15 in the NFAR proposals, and this made reference to FIFA's clearinghouse for agent payments. Now, as we've stated in previous episodes, as far as we are aware, the FIFA clearinghouse will not be processing agent payments for some time, and there is no date on FIFA's public FFAR implementation timeline for this. We believe it's possibly something like 2 years we're going to see international agents' payments processed through the FIFA clearinghouse. And for agent-related domestic payments, we haven't had a timeline on that from FIFA whatsoever. So it may be many years in the future if it ever comes in. So the question we've asked from several weeks ago in regards to the FA NFAR document was, does this infer that the FA clearinghouse in the near future will no longer handle agent payments?
Jonathan, we try to be very resourceful here at the Agents Angle in getting the best and most reliable information for our listeners. And I like to cross-check, being of legal background and having regulatory experience. I think with the clearinghouse, the FA was a pioneer in introducing a clearinghouse for payments through the transfer system and agents What surprises me is that this decision or this move has happened when the Rule K arbitration is not finished. Now, the Rule K arbitration could have impacts on caps or commissions or service fees in England, the way that decision goes. It could have effect on the way agents are paid. These are all big questions. But I'm very surprised at the timing.
On this subject, we now seemingly have an answer following an FA email sent to intermediaries and agents with the FA last week, which was seemingly sent earlier to clubs in England. The email states that from the 16th of October 2023, 1, the FA will no longer be operating its clearinghouse, and 2, any payments that would have been paid via the clearinghouse must now be paid directly to the intended recipient. So it transpires our presumption from a few weeks ago with the NFAR proposals was correct. The FA clearinghouse in England will soon no longer handle agent payments. Now, I acknowledge that the FA clearinghouse was ridiculed, criticised, and a source of huge frustration for many agents over the years. And I know there is one well-known and very colourful character from the agent fraternity who will be celebrating having challenged the validity of the FA clearinghouse for many years. And I believe he even challenged it through legal means on the grounds of it being an illegal banking facility at one point. However, it is my understanding that the FA's clearinghouse, for all its faults, was held out by some in the football community as a good idea. In fact, if it operated efficiently and fairly, I would possibly agree with that view. And I would go as far to say that probably as far back as 2015, if not even earlier, it was envied by other national associations for processing agent payments, and may have even been the inspiration for FIFA and the FFAR for the clearinghouse handling agent payments. But it is worth noting, back in 2015, I was actually told by an FA official they'd been wanting to abolish the clearinghouse for some time. So whilst FIFA move ahead with FFAR and their clearinghouse, we have the almost paradoxical situation of the English FA reverting back to RWWI from 2015, albeit possibly temporarily, and abolishing their clearinghouse, arguably because of the FFAR from 2023. So more confusion there for everyone in some ways, but a simplification in others, meaning again, we will have to adapt as best we can to the ever-changing factor of football agent regulations and the agent space itself.
Well, that's an interesting observation, Jonathan. I've spoken to a lot of agents who are based overseas like myself, not English, who have dealt with English deals and are registered FA intermediaries and have had dealings with the clearinghouse. A lot of them found it a more compliance type system in dealing with fees. So many would be surprised because we don't have that in many other jurisdictions. But what I'm getting the feeling here is that with the FIFA Football Agent Regulation implementation, I thought we would see some consistency. But yet again, now we're starting to see a lot of different jurisdictions, different things happening. And now if you're saying that there's going to be a shift in terms of the clearinghouse and the way the FA is going to operate or no longer have that, that's going to be another shift for agents to cope with. So we have quite interesting times ahead. And one thing the FIFA license was always about, the objective was to provide that sort of international level playing field where most of the regulations are the same, but it seems now things are shifting in different countries and jurisdictions, as we've seen in this podcast, and we'll discuss a little bit further on other national football agent regulations. So it doesn't seem the consistency is there, but I'm very surprised that the FA is making this move because from an outside point of view, the clearinghouse was seen as one of the fundamental mechanisms to assist in getting the agent fees, Jonathan.
I think overall, two things that have been lost in this whole saga over FFAR, whether you're a FIFA official, a national association, one of the leading agents who was engaged by FIFA, arguably in an ill-advised way back in 2018, or even a new agent, are one, looking at it from the perspective of others involved and those affected, and two, analysing past mistakes and oversights when it came to football agent licensing and regulations. Now, where could we go to gain that unique insight into football agent regulations from various perspectives? And thus, without a DeLorean, going back to the future on matter of agent regulations to look at the issues objectively, pragmatically, and constructively. And with that, I would like to introduce our guest today, someone who we've been wanting to get on the agent's angle for some time, but he's understandably very busy in the football world, especially at the moment. In my view, he's a guru on football agent regulations and possibly has a perspective on football agent matters that very few, if any, can replicate. So at this point, I would like to introduce Paolo Lombardi to the show. Paolo, welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good to hear from you.
As well as being an honorary professor of the International Sports Law, ISDE Masters in Madrid, his professional experience gives him a unique perspective from both sides of the football agents world in terms of agent regulation and operation in accordance with those regulations. Paolo began his career in the football industry when he joined FIFA's Player Status Department in 2002, becoming deputy head of that department in 2006. And as of 2005 was in charge of all agent-related matters. During his time at FIFA, Paolo was involved in working groups for the drafting and redrafting of various FIFA regulations, including the agent regulations and the RSTP. In 2007, he was appointed head of FIFA Disciplinary and Governance. In this role, he oversaw all disciplinary and governance matters both in-house and at various FIFA tournaments, such as the Beijing Olympics in 2008 and the 2010 FIFA World Cup in South Africa. After leaving FIFA following the 2010 FIFA World Cup, Paolo founded Lombardi Associates, a sports regulatory firm which acts for a range of football stakeholder clients, including clubs, players, coaches, intermediaries, stroke agents, associations, leagues, and investors. His work includes advising over 1/3 of clubs in Italian Serie A and a number of clubs across the UK and Europe on issues such as transfers, dispute resolution, breach of contract, training compensation, solidarity mechanism, registration of minors, eligibility, and a whole lot more. Paolo, we are very, very grateful to have you join us.
Good to be here, Jonathan and Peter.
Welcome, Paolo, to the podcast.
Thank you.
Now, Paolo, I've covered there that you've got a huge knowledge and background of working in football regulatory and, in particular, agent regulations. Can you just share with us some of the key insights? And I know we could go on for a long time here, into the evolving landscape of football agent regulations over the years, both past and present.
I can safely say that FIFA has been floating in and out of governing the activities of agents. Agents were not recognized. In fact, they were sort of outcast until the early to mid 90s, when FIFA went heavily into and started regulating the agents. This is the time, approximately between 94 and 2001, when an agent had to be called FIFA agent. Actually, that's the only time in which this denomination is correct, because the agents were, in fact, physically licensed by FIFA. And the agents basically applied to obtain the license through their national associations just through an interview, really. It was a fit and proper person test, ante litteram, I would say. And then in 2001, due to a famous court case at European level, breach of anti-competition law, FIFA stopped referring to agents as FIFA agents, but a new set of regulations came into force in 2001 when agents started being referred to as agents licensed by the National Association. So there was no longer FIFA agents. In fact, an agent found to have used the logo, the name of FIFA, would be subject to sanctions. The 2001 regulations were enforced until 2008, when a harsher, if you will, regulations came into force, I would say on the back of famous Article 17 cases from Mexes to Webster and others. And then 3 years into the new regulations, FIFA realized that wasn't worth it, really. And then the deregulation came into force on 1st of April 2015, when everything was devolved to the associations. So FIFA went out of regulating agents and now back in a fashion that reminds us the 90s, because the FFAR is a football agent, is a FIFA agent, as it were. So that is in extreme since this is what happened. Is the last 30 years of agents and how FIFA has approached them from a regulatory point of view.
From your time at FIFA, what were the most frequent and problematic issues you faced with football agents and the actual regulations?
Well, the main issue, having been involved in the steering group of 1.5 sets of regulations, is who represents the agents, really. They didn't have a consistent representation. There were all these different groups of agents, different acronyms. There were individuals who would come to the fore and say, we represent the interests of the agents. But then you realize that whatever ideas they were putting forward did not match with other agents' ideas. So that was the main issue we had in consulting the agents, really, in the process. We found an exceptionally fragmented landscape.
Looking forward to your role now, how does your past experience and knowledge at FIFA influence and benefit your approach to advising clients, whether they be agents, clubs, players in the football agent world now?
It's a bit like having a vantage point, isn't it? You get to see how different parties behave in the market. And it's extremely grateful of opportunity I had to work for FIFA, of course. But equally, I realized that it's the match between the two, having worked for FIFA and having worked in private practice, that really helps you try and learn from a bit of both, really. And when we advise our clients, we tend to also, explain the do's and don'ts, that you can't do this. And, and the so what is not really an answer. You try and explain, if you do this, if you engage in double representation, for example. So you try to explain something based on previous experience helps. Knowing why this is wrong, knowing why conflict of interest, for example, is an issue. This is what I believe that's the type of experience we try and reflect in what we do.
There's always a discussion between agent fees and clubs paying the agent fees, and then there's perception that agents get paid too much money, but the clubs are willing to pay those fees. Now, obviously with FFAR, there are caps, but not in all countries, because obviously litigation, and some countries may not implement the caps. But in terms of the FIFA Football Agent Regulations, do you think it's going to improve the relationship and the understanding between football clubs and agents, especially considering now that there's a formalization where agents can now represent clubs for indefinite period of time, so they can get the mandates or the representative agreement? Do you think clubs and agents will work better together now under these new arrangements?
Nobody knows is the short answer, but it can do. I think, in my opinion, there are 3 or 4 elements which, in my opinion, are absolutely crucial for this relationship to work. First one is one that is often forgotten and underestimated, which is education for agents, players, and clubs, which doesn't really mean exclusively know your do's and don'ts. Generally speaking, being educated, having a knowledge of what the industry is about. The second is a clear and consistent set of rules worldwide. And I underline worldwide because if you look at the intermediary regime between 1st of April 2015 and yesterday, well, consensus is it didn't work. But really? Because I know of countries in which it worked perfectly well. Because in these countries, clubs, players, stakeholders in general, agents, did know what was what. This is not happening at international level at the minute. But if you do not give a clear and consistent set of universally applicable rules, there is no point in regulating. The other element, which in my opinion helps certainty in the relationship between parties, clubs and agents and players, is clear enforcement system of execution of decisions that FIFA, CAS, doesn't matter. I know that if I am owed that amount of commission, I know that ultimately I will be able to get it. And I need to know exactly where I can go, whether it's Rule K in England, ordinary courts in Italy, doesn't matter. I need to know that. So clear rules also on enforcement. And then, as you said, transparency. I'll give you an example with this universal application worldwide. I'll give you an example. One of the biggest Italian clubs we work with, they were really over and said to us, look, we only work with Italian agents because the system is such at the minute. I will let you imagine the confusion of the many agents who operate in Italy and many agents from abroad who operate in Italy, and they don't know what is what because there is no clear rule. So yeah, that's just to give you one example.
This is a bit of a curveball question, but we ask it of most, if not all, our guests. If you could describe the football agents world and the agents industry as a whole in one word, what would it be and why?
I'm not a big fan of labels, but what the industry, in my opinion, needs at the moment is consistent representation. So fragmented would probably be an answer on reflection.
Now, obviously, we want to look forward now. We don't want to look back too much on the past. We've got to embrace what we've got and the position we're in now. But just briefly, you weren't at FIFA when RWWI regulations on working with intermediaries was introduced. And my opinion personally has changed of what was trying to be achieved at that time and the implementation. But on reflection, looking back, what was your view on RWWI? Not least, could it have worked and should it have worked?
As I was leaving FIFA, I think one of my last meetings I had was about whether or not players' agents regulations were working. So 2 years into the approval, 2 to 3 years, and we had the impression that it wasn't really working. It wasn't really supported by data. It was just a feeling. And then TMS came about from 2011 on. I just left FIFA. And TMS showed that only a fraction of the international transfers featured the involvement of an agent. At which point, FIFA had to wonder whether it was appropriate or whether it wasn't pointless to regulate the activity of agents. Because either if, say, 2 out of 10 transfers have officially seen the involvement of an agent, does it mean that the other 8 players are all represented by parents or sisters? So, there was that exception back in the day. Or maybe there's a lack of transparency, which at that point FIFA felt was best dealt with a deregulation, with devolving all this to the associations. Now, on account of FIFA's dramatic U-turn, one would be tempted to say it didn't work. Intermediary regime didn't work. Some people refer to it as the Wild West out there. But yet, some countries still had the exam, like Italy, for example, a super difficult exam, and in their own way, it did work. So, could and should this system work? Could have, probably. Could have. And it's probably just a reflection of what I was saying earlier, of how difficult it is to have a universal, a worldwide set of rules that applies to 211 different football associations.
Now, I'm going to ask you another difficult question here, and this is looking forward. We're now 2 days in from the scheduled date of the full implementation of FFAR. What do you foresee will happen over the next couple of weeks, if not the next 6 months and further into the future? There's a lot of people confused, but I'm not going to hold you to it, obviously, because we're all trying to get our heads around about how this is going to develop. But what do you foresee will happen?
Well, I'm unable to predict what will happen in the next probably whatever.
Well, I'm going to ask you for the lottery numbers next.
Yes, that's. I think that is more likely. I give you winning numbers there. I don't know. Is a short answer. I'm not surprised at all these challenges, of course. and suspensions, so to speak. I'm not surprised by it. I'm surprised that FIFA thought that this would be applied, or if FIFA thought that the FFAR would be implemented without a challenge. At the moment, considering what things are like in Germany, England, the Netherlands, Scotland, but also Italy, I don't know about France. If these are not the big five, we're not far off. And if you go through the biggest grossing countries in terms of transfer, you will find England, Germany, Italy, France. And the current suspensions, I think they will ultimately have an impact on how the FFAR will be in the final form, so to speak. So do I think that it will all just go away and the FFAR will be implemented as planned by FIFA and as enforced for the last 24 hours? No, I don't think this will be the end product. I might be wrong.
Just before we got onto this podcast, we saw a media release from the Scottish Football Association who are not implementing FIFA FFAR in terms of their national football agent regulations. It's gone to an arbitration. So at the moment, the intermediate regulations are still in place. We saw that in England as well. There's a delay because of an arbitration. Mm-hmm. But France has its own system, national system, and Italy.
Yeah.
In terms of Italy, is there any update on what the situation is? We know that a lot of Italian agents have sat the exam elsewhere to get that license so they can work internationally. But in terms of Italy itself, is there any update of what's happening with the agent regulations at this time?
Well, at the time of recording, there's no news in relation to how Italy will operate in this sense. It's worth reminding that Italy, like France, has two systems. One is the FIGC, and the FIFA Football Agent exam was regularly held. In fact, twice already, obviously with a view to the FFAR being applicable. But at the same time, the activities of the agent, as in they who operate within the agency contract, agency activities in general, is regulated by a state law, and that is with the CONI, the Italian National Olympic Committee. That duplicity has been in place for, I would say, 4 years now, and therefore we're still waiting to see whether the Italian state will just say we give up on regulating agents on the basis that the FFAR are there. Not sure about that. Or they will still find a way to have the double system. I remember when we were at FIFA, when drafting the players' agents examinations, we would send out the questions to France. Our 15 questions, France were meant to add 5 questions on national regulations, and they added much more than that. But it wouldn't surprise me if Italy and France carried on with the double system.
At this point of looking with Paolo at the announcements in Scotland in regards to FFAR, as well as the agent regulations as they stand in Italy, it seems an opportune time to break away from the interview. And we will come back to the interview with Paolo in a bit. But in the last week, we've had several developments with various national member football associations, with not only the implementation of FFAR, but also their NFAR and domestic regulations.
I want to go into a bit of an update on several unique football associations around the world and their national agent regulations. The way it sort of worked was FIFA has got its FFAR, but it's also got a model agent regulations for national associations to implement. And in that, they can add different layers. But I want to go around the world into a few countries and some unique regulations that have crept into their national football agent regulations. Firstly, Croatia, and I find this quite interesting, that agents are eligible to manage and represent minors as early as 6 months before they reach the age of 12. The reason for 12 years old is that's when they're eligible for pretty much a scholarship or some sort of contract. In most countries will be 15, 16, but 12, I've never seen that before. I want to move on to India now. Not much change from what FIFA's model is, but two little interesting, I would say, regulations. One is they've stipulated that they're using a certain website called Oanda in order to have a conversion rate of the Indian rupee to the US dollar, which is the currency used by FIFA in terms of players' remuneration. So we know that with a service fee cap, you've got that 5 and 3% commission if you're representing a coach or an individual. And if there's that 200,000 USD cap. I want to move to my local national association, being Australia. We're still waiting for the final model to be published. At this stage, there's three points here that I think are interesting for not just Australian agents, but agents who want to operate in the Australian space. The FAs, Football Australia, we call it here, will have a grievance procedure, which is like a tribunal or an arbitration, which will apply to hear national dimension agent matters. Currently, under the working with intermediary regulation, the agents did not have access to Football Australia's tribunal. So that's a very important move for national matters that affect agents. The other change is that in Australia, all agents need to get the working with children check. Now, there's one more observation, but this is not official and it's come through certain channels. But until I see the final regulations from Australia, but this is a very interesting one. Australia, because of its competition law, our national competition laws don't allow caps that easily. Consequently, it may be that Australia does not implement, and this is very provisional, this is not official, but this is what I'm hearing, may not implement the FIFA prescribed caps, service fee caps. But watch your space, that's not official, but that's what I've been hearing from quite reliable sources. I want to go to Norway now. And Norway has specifically said its representation agreements to be valid has one extra requirement bar the 5 that FIFA has put in. They've actually said that in the contract, the representative agreement between the agent and whether it's the club, the player, the coach, you must have your football agent's FIFA license number on there as the 6 major contracting requirements. That's quite interesting. And finally, Sweden, they've also published the National Football Agents Regulations. We see Scandinavian countries, a lot of them have. They've also got an arbitration tribunal, which will determine disputes arising in connection with representative agreements that don't have an international dimension. However, as a sub-condition of that, if that agreement has both a national dimension and maybe an international dimension, so it deals with different transactions, they still can hear that matter. That could be related to a coach or a club or a player. So that's quite interesting. We'll keep a note of other national football agent regulations, but let's head back to Paolo's interview, where now we're going to focus on professionalism and transparency and whether the FFAR and the National Football Agent Regulations can make a difference in the agent industry. Paolo, we hear the words professionalism, transparency, ethics bandied around the football world, and including the agent space. Could you elaborate on the importance of transparent ethical practices for football agents in today's regulatory football landscape?
Peter, it's absolutely crucial. This has changed so much. This coupled with all the technology, compared to when I started 21, 22 years ago. Transparency is now the rule, where we used to be the exception. If you look at the regulatory landscape with the clearinghouse, for example, recently implemented FIFA legal portal, the TMS, everything can be easily checked. The requirement, which we started when I was at FIFA, that was about 15 years ago now, for member associations to publish the earnings of agents on a yearly basis. This has become now the rule. And transparency, especially in this day and age, cannot be disregarded. In fact, has to be the rule.
You mentioned technology. The clearinghouse is coming probably on board in 2 years with relation to agent fees. We know that TMS now is the matching, and also agents are involved in that. We know that there's going to be an agent directory as part of the new platform that FIFA is implementing, that which agents are licensed. There's also reporting by not just agents, but clubs as well. There's some reporting there, especially when they do the transfers, the international transfers. So that goes in, as well as FIFA will also probably get access to national reporting from certain federations, especially with the bigger deals. So with all this, in terms of, we mentioned transparency, but also tracking agent activities, do you think it's all going to change and be much more, I would say, more compliant in terms of the football regulatory space?
Well, I believe this is the idea. Whether or not this will work, that's the idea. And it's part of, in my opinion, a process that can't be stopped. You won't be able to explain, especially to the newer generations, why there's no transparency on this or that. Everything is so much more easily accessed these days. As a principle, it'd be very hard to justify not to have full transparency. So it's going down that route. The system's going down that route, and there's no stopping it. However, whether or not in real life it will work, I don't know. I don't see the clearinghouse for agents, for example, to be of imminent, implementation for obvious reasons. But it will happen. It will. It works like that in Italy internally, and so I don't see why not. It will happen, but not imminently.
You mentioned the word stakeholders.
Yeah.
FIFA obviously had an engagement process about these new FIFA Football Agent Regulations. They also engage with ECA, which is the European Club Association, FIFPro, Players Union, World Leagues, maybe even confederations and other stakeholders. But in terms of agents themselves, as someone who's been involved, like yourself, in the regulation of football agents in the past in FIFA, and also working with agents in the last decade on contracts and agreements and on player deals, etc., what do you think that agents aren't seen as stakeholders? And what can agents do to change this to be a core stakeholder in the football ecosystem?
I would say that it's lack of consistent representation. You mentioned ECA. And I was around when the G7 became G8, and then how the clubs gradually began to count to be considered at FIFA level. And slowly they developed this massive organization, which is a stakeholder, which is ECA. The agents don't have this. They need to sort themselves out. They need to speak with one voice, really. And in my opinion, if they want to be taken into consideration for steering groups, etc. Whether or not agents are stakeholders, we can talk until tomorrow, really. If we define a stakeholder as someone who has an interest in the industry and the decisions taken within the industry, etc., so most definitely yes. But yes, I would say lack of consistent representation is the issue.
Football agency is an international business.
Yeah,
we hear a lot about the big European agents, or I don't want to use the term super agents or the lead agents. But agents, the majority of agents are smaller agents in diverse markets. And considering the global nature of football, and we're seeing emergence of leagues of MLS, even the A-League in Australia, both salary cap leagues. We've seen Saudi Arabia, the J-League. How do you think regulations can be ensured to allow for diversity of representation of agents? What I mean is to ensure that the fit of the regulations covers effectively all the agents and allows them to work effectively in the football transfer space.
That is an excellent question. And reality shows that this is very difficult to obtain. I would probably go back to transparency, simplicity, and without really want to get into the merits of the many disputes that are currently pending, I would say also some of these issues would have to be looked into in order also to cater for the new emerging leagues. So I don't know is the answer, but full transparency coupled with new technology available. These regulations need to be easy to use, need to be easy to understand, need to be adopted at worldwide level. Otherwise, there's absolutely no point in regulating. I think FIFA thought it would be easy to jump back into regulating agents after the deregulations. And this is not the case because things have changed since 2015. These 8 years have taken the toll. I'm sure a few associations are wondering why they have to go back to a previous system. So you need to be credible. You need to a light touch in some of the issues so that it can apply transversally from Australia to Saudi Arabia to the MLS and England. In order for a set of regulations to be universally applied, you need a bit more than that.
It's interesting, Paolo, you say that, because the regulators have to strike a balance between providing structure, but also the flexibility for agents to do deals. And we know with FFAR that it needs to evolve as part of the industry. But I want to pivot to a question where you've got experience in doing a lot of transfers and advising clubs as well as agents, and having seen your bio, United Arab Emirates, Italy, England, Scotland, Spain, Brazil, Portugal, Norway. You've worked with agents or intermediaries and agents for a long period of time. What have you seen the changes in the agent business, say, in the last decade? What trends, the way that agents work, the way the business has evolved in dealing with agents, whether representing the club or whether representing the agent themselves in finalizing a deal?
When I was at FIFA, it was a lot more clear-cut. My idea of the agents industry, of how agents worked, was pretty much based on the drafting of the regulations, of the FIFA Plays Agents regulations, of what I wanted it to look like. So there is a club and there is one agent and there is one player. And this agent will only, if he represents the player, it will only speak to the player, will never speak to the club. There was a huge naivety which I got out of very soon into my new career. I've not come across in the last 13 years any transfer in which only one agent was involved. I think minimum five different agents is now the rule. And this, of course, opens a Pandora's box. In fact, a can of worms sometimes in terms of commission sharing agreements. So yes, the lines are a lot more blurred than I wanted to think when I was younger and had a lot more hair. And no, there are shades of gray, and this is where you need to apply a realistic vision of what the industry is like. And that's why your rules need to be easy to understand, easy to apply, very general. And you need to strike a balance between wanting to over-regulate and deregulate.
Football lawyers or sports lawyers, we're seeing more of them advising on deals and sitting beside agents, especially in the bigger deals, but also now in Saudi and MLS, even in Japan, but obviously England,
yes.
Italy. I won't go through all the countries. What's your view on their role? It's essential now in the bigger deals because not all agents are lawyers. Agents now have to know the regulations because that's part of the exam, or when legacy agents got a lot of experience with regulations and negotiations. But there is a trend where we're seeing a lot more lawyers involved in the deals. What's your view on that? Are lawyers now ingrained in the business with agents in getting a lot of the bigger deals done? And have you seen that trend increase over the last 5 years?
Absolutely, Peter. And it's a very good question because that is something that's one of the consequences of deregulations as well. The lines between, being an agent and being a lawyer sometimes disappeared. But it sort of reminds me of two players. One is Jurgen Klinsmann back 30 years ago, and De Bruyne. They both said, correct me if I'm wrong, all I need to negotiate my package, my contract, is my lawyer and my accountant. Yes, we are more and more involved in this. I think this is also part of a process that we will see more and more of in the future. Specialized advice for transfers for players, and football lawyers are part of this. Yes, most definitely.
Paolo, you're not the first guest who we've had on who's mentioned the word
Yeah.
fragmentation or fragmented when it comes to the world of agent matters. How can the football industry collaborate to ensure that future agent regulations are forward-thinking, that they're keeping pace with societal changes, and they're aligning with the broader interests and goals of the sport? And above all, avoiding the conflict and uncertainty that we currently face with the agency world?
Well, I see that we've been talking about the FFAR, okay? But we should not forget that the FFAR are parts of a package of reforms, which, of course, included the regulations on the citizen transfer players, women's football. So the FFAR is one part of all this. Other than that, a regulator needs to keep their eyes open. In order to be credible, a regulator needs to address. A regulator by nature is always reactive as opposed to proactive. That is the nature. Stuff happens, and then you put in place rules to make it work, to give it a legal regulatory framework. So you can only wish for the regulator to be sensitive enough to be aware and alert enough to be aware of what is happening out there and implement regulations that match the ever-evolving society, really.
One final question for you, Paolo. As we've established, you've probably got that unique perspective and understanding of all the various parties and elements involved in the agents industry, whether it be agents, clubs, the regulators. If you had one wish for the football agents industry moving forward, what would it be?
An industry is always as good as the people who make it. And I really want to see people who are given the tools or are as professional and as educated as they can be. So I would say that education and professionality are, in my opinion, the two things I would really like to see going forward. More of, I should have said at the beginning, because there's this stigma around agents. There are amazing agents. I've seen clients do amazing things for their players, their clients. I've seen agents give up commissions. I've seen the most amazing individuals I have come across. But at the same time, I've also come across some stuff that I don't want to see anymore. And I think that education and professionalism, in my opinion, are the two things that I'd love to see.
Paolo, I think that's a good point to finish. Thank you so very much for your time. Much appreciated in your insights and knowledge on the industry as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paolo.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Wow, in my experience, it's rare we will see a football lawyer who was at the regulator and part of the implementation of agent regulation and development in the past. To have a guest like that who also worked in the national market like Italy, where the agents are recognized by the Olympic Committee. That's more of a statutory type agency, a national recognition of the profession, and also working on deals in the UK, Spain, etc. So very interesting guest and great to get some insights there, Jonathan.
I think there's certainly a lot we can all learn from that interview with Paolo, whether agents, clubs, or even regulators at FIFA and the national member associations, not least looking at the bigger picture and looking at it from the viewpoints of others. And although I don't agree with everything Paolo had to say, most of it, yes, I did, particularly that I believe a regulator needs to be proactive as well as reactive and try and stay ahead of the game, especially in something so fast-moving as football. But maybe that's just me. There is a lot to think about there from Paolo as someone who's been there and done it, both as a regulator on one side of the fence to now advising those arguably on the other side of the fence.
Yes, I think the key is, Paolo's got experience from the former regulations. Now he's working on the other side, advising clubs, agents, a key lawyer for a lot of deals. But whether it's the older regulations, the regulations are working with intermediaries, and now the FFAR and the national FFAR, and also the state type regulations in France or Italy, I think enforcement and compliance is the key, and making sure that everyone complies to have a level playing field in terms of everyone meets their obligations, and not just the agents, players, clubs, and other stakeholders have to be all part of that. And Paolo has seen it from both sides, as you mentioned, but for all of us, we need to see consistency and enforcement, and that's what it's about.
Yeah, and despite all that confusion and some of the, shall I say, doom and gloom surrounding FFAR, I think we both agree there are some positives to take from the new regulatory framework when it comes to agents. That's if people want to be genuine and look for them rather than live in their own echo chamber. Now, one thing that I personally believe is a positive to come from the new Football Agent Regulatory Framework is the new FIFA Agent Platform or portal. Now, we'll acknowledge the agent platform is by no means perfect, and it has demonstrated flaws and bugs over the last 9 months and continues to do so. A big issue this week, since the Register of Agents went live, is the omission of certain agents, and these seem to be those based in the UK. And despite some showing up previously, they don't show up now. There is some debate whether this is indeed a bug or a deliberate action, given the Rule K arbitration in England over FFAR and a similar process ongoing in Scotland, meaning the RWWI are still in place. But the response I got from FIFA, although it seemed pretty generic, is that it is a technical issue. Just both the timing and the length of time it is taking to fix is strange, and quite rightly people are getting stressed and a bit suspicious over it. You and I discussed it earlier in the week, Peter, when agents were starting to ask questions about it, and rightly so, because if a client or third party was checking if an agent were licensed with FIFA or not, it could affect their reputation and or their business. And we both, to varying degrees, gave the benefit of the doubt to FIFA that it was indeed a technical issue and not a deliberate omission. However, on reflection, I had a quick browse of the agent register and could find no German agents that I know listed on there either. So the question I have now is, are FIFA treading a thin line here so as not to risk being seen to contravene arbitration or court rulings, and thus being perceived as forcing through FFAR in territories where we are still awaiting awards and judgments? As despite being able to cover a fine of €150,000, as with the court in Germany, they don't want any more bad PR or criticism relating to FFAR.
I'm of the view that I think it's more of a technical bug issue. Got 3,800, and that's going to expand because what I'm hearing is nearly all the agents from England and Scotland weren't on there. That may relate to the arbitrations, but there are bugs in the system. There was bugs about the license numbers on that portal. People who did the minors training, it was problematic getting through the questions, got stuck, etc. And then when they did complete it, they went off the system. So there was another bug there. Also, agents are asking, where do they upload their contracts? That will come on board as well. There are good features. I think it's going to improve, but they're going to be bugs. I don't think there's anything intentional here, Jonathan.
Now, we're going to give the agent platform, understandably, a bit more time to iron out these various bugs and also develop in terms of content, such as the CPD modules, before we start to scrutinise it more heavily. But I would say that FIFA really don't help themselves sometimes, and we have come across some really useful tools and resources recently and in the past from FIFA that would really help agents. That's if the agents readily knew about them. One for us, Peter, I recall, was the training compensation calculator that we found out about several months ago. And now I understand we have some form of representation contract generator. But I shake my head in total disbelief that these are somewhat, I wouldn't say hidden, because if you know their existence, you could possibly find them. But why on earth are resources such as this not linked from the agent's platform itself? Come on, FIFA, these are basics that will help you as well as help the agents. So, Peter, being a legal whiz that you are, you've had a look at this contract generator, which may be the replacement for template contracts or a complementary tool when those contracts are released by FIFA.
I've gone into this FIFA representation agreement template, and we will put in the show notes the link for this FIFA representation agreement template. It is in 3 languages, English, Spanish, French. It's a contract generator. I know that getting some feedback from some members of the FIFA Agents Working Group that a template has not been decided yet, but that's still a work in progress. However, this is a very interesting template where you can build a contract. And I've just gone through it and I'll just mention a few of the features. You can set up your agreement date. You can obviously have your contact details of both the client and yourself. And it pretty much allows you to put the words in that you want to use, the description of services. So pretty much it follows the regulations. What are the necessary minimum information to put in a contract? You put the dates in terms of the fees, the percentages in terms of whether you're representing an individual or engaging entity, and even mentions certain articles of the FIFA Football Agent Regulations. For example, Article 15, which relates to payments, percentage applicable to football agents representing, for instance, a releasing entity. It allows you to choose exclusivity. It allows you to choose the territories, worldwide or specific. And if you choose specific, you can choose certain countries and geographies. Also, an important element here is whether the client has been informed that they can get independent legal advice about this contract and put that clause in. So the client goes away, gets independent advice and signs off that they have, or they waive that right. So this calculator actually covers the minimum conditions that need to be in a contract. It's a very interesting feature, and I think until the final template comes, this may be a very useful tool for agents, because as we know, there's only 5-6 minimum conditions that you need to have in a representative agreement. This covers it and explains it. And I'm actually quite impressed with this contract generator.
I think it's a welcome initiative that it provides that framework, and it obviously ticks those boxes that are required in the contract under the FFAR. But for me, Peter, I'd have to say I wouldn't necessarily trust this platform as a total contract builder as such. I'd prefer to draft my own contracts specific to a client and get the correct professional legal advice from the likes of yourself or even Paolo to fine-tune them and get a legal professional to dot the I's and cross the T's, so to speak. Also, whilst we have the confusion and fragmentation in regulations, both internationally and nationally, I would hold off using it beyond that very basic framework, and I would use it for that framework just to save that bit of time. But I appreciate for some it may well prove to be a valuable resource, and I think it's pretty difficult to argue that it isn't more valuable and a better resource than the template agreement we had from FIFA pre-2015.
My initial thoughts, definitely better. However, it's a work in progress, as is the agents portal we discussed earlier. And for us, we've put an invitation to FIFA to come and talk about agent continuing professional education, or CPD, professional development, the FIFA Agent Executive Program, the Agents Platform, and also other related agent resources, not just the FFAR matters. At this stage, we haven't got anything confirmed. However, anyone who wants to help develop football agents world in a positive way, our door and invitation is always open. Now, next week's episode, we're going to focus on the role of Agents Association. We have a very special guest. We're going to look at the consultation with FIFA about the agents regulations, and we'll look at a little bit on the continuous professional development on the agent platform. So a lot to look forward to, but that always could change. We don't know what's going to happen with the Rule K arbitration in England. We don't know whether it's going to happen, the resits in England. There are also agents who want us to talk about the business and how to do deals. So there's a lot coming on.
And likewise, the invitation's always open to anybody listening to post any comments, any questions, and of course, leave the ratings via the normal podcast platforms and channels. So for this week, that's all from me. Take care, folks, and we'll see you next week.
Bye from me.
The purpose of the Agents Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.